If you're okay with it, Mark, I would like to start by giving you a proper introduction.
Yeah, let's go. Sounds
Okay.
good to me. Yeah, thanks.
Most of our audience thinks of the Find Me Project and podcast as a search and recovery organization. This episode makes the case that prevention is part of the mission. A large share of missing adult cases start the same way: a family watching someone spiral into addiction or mental illness, powerless to act until it's too late. And sometimes too late means the person walks out the door and never comes back. Mark has spent his early career prosecuting the aftermath of that failure. He now builds the legal off ramp families didn't know existed. This episode gives listeners something they can actually use and not just something to feel. Mark, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Nice to see you.
So, one of the things that we like to do is as we get ready for an episode like this, we like to reach out to our community and see if they have any questions. And we actually have a user submitted question, and I'm hoping you're okay if I read that to you.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, awesome. So this question comes from Riley Thompson from Hickory, North Carolina. She writes, is there a difference between what the law lets you do for addiction versus mental illness?
Well, okay, so I'll speak. I'm barred in Florida and in Massachusetts. So I'll sort of talk in terms of what I'm licensed to talk about. So, I mean, I think one is what can you legally do? And the other is what are we looking at from a clinical perspective? And I think in my world, where I built a law firm, working with families whose loved ones are suffering from substance use and mental health issues, you have to have both pieces together. I mean, and I tell clients, if you just want something filed with the court, I'm probably not the right lawyer for you. My goal is to save your loved one and in the process, save your family. So, I mean, my wife and I, who's my partner, we spend a lot of time in the behavioral health space, going to different treatment centers, meeting the clinical staff, and finding out what options, can really work for a family. I also have two amazing clinicians who are part of my team. They're sort of an a la carte option for a family that can help us to find the right facility. Because getting somebody into the clinically appropriate facility and using the legal system to make sure they stay there long enough and giving the families, some control, things such as access to medical records and the ability to prevent them from sort of getting on a plane and flying away are really part of the recovery process. So you got to have both pieces, clinical and legal. I think that answered the question, but let me know if you need some clarification.
No, it did. It certainly answered it. And, shout out and thank you to Riley for
Thank
asking
you.
that question. The first thing I want to talk about is sort of the origin story. And I think this section is going to be really important for families to hear. But before I ask one of the first questions, I want to go back to your beginning. And you actually started as a prosecutor, right?
I did. I was an assistant state attorney from 1994 to 1999, and I had actually interned with them in 93, which was what really got me excited to do courtroom work. Because I'll be honest, I wasn't a particularly passionate law student. I always tell people I was in the top half of the class, which means I wasn't that far off the bottom half. I mean, I wasn't a law review student, and to be honest, I was like, okay, what's the point of all of this? Well, I figured out the point of it when I started to try cases. Then it all made sense for me. And that's where I found, I felt like I was on a level playing field with anybody else. That made sense to me.
So, going back to that time frame, what did the criminal justice system actually look like from the inside for someone in addiction or psychiatric crisis?
Yeah, that's such an important question. So, I was a prosecutor back in the mid 90s around the time of the O.J. Simpson case. And back then, we didn't have what I would call diversionary courts. So we didn't have courts for people who, we didn't have drug court. We didn't have mental health court. We didn't have veterans court, right? The mandate, even today in Florida's criminal justice system and many other criminal justice systems, is to punish first and to rehabilitate second. And it's in, you open up the criminal rules book here in Florida, and it says the legislative mandate is we punish first and we rehabilitate second. Well, back in the 90s, we didn't have these specialty courts where we could potentially divert people out of the criminal justice system and get them the help they need, right? When we didn't have that, if somebody just kept coming back often, frequently, which is what started to happen when I started to notice and was wondering why, then at some point, the only option is just to lock them up for as long as you can. Now, my experience, both as a prosecutor and as a defense lawyer, as a general, people, especially people with mental health issues, do not get better in a locked down, secure environment. They actually tend to get worse. So, and they also experience that here in Florida. We have a mental health system. Most states, I think every state does, but our one is very draconian and broken, and it again allows the state to lock people up. We have private entities that are for profit that are licensed as agents of the state's mental health system. They are, for all intents and purposes, a private prison, right? And again, people don't typically get that well there. So we really don't want people in the state system, but it does happen. And I noticed it when I was prosecutor that we kept seeing the same faces over and over again. These folks weren't getting help. And invariably, we just ended up to have to lock them up, a year in the county jail. What else are we going to do? Put them on probation. They were violating. So that's what tended to happen. And to a certain extent, I think it still does happen. We've gotten better at it, but part of the problem is that we don't have great treatment available for everybody, and that in the state ends up stepping into their life.
A mission with purpose to find the missing using the power of social networking and cutting-edge technology. We're military veterans, technologists, scuba divers, and relentless seekers. From deep forests to sunken vehicles, from silence to signal, every clue matters. If you've ever felt the call to stand for something greater, this is your moment. This is the Find Me Project.
Yeah, and it's actually good you bring this up because it segues into a question that you sort of already answered, but I want to, from your perspective, see if you can, tell us your thoughts on how we could fix the broken system. But, when we work with families that are missing somebody, we've been successful in locating a handful of missing people up to this point. We see a common line, and this is actually a phrase from a family member we just spoke to last week, where she said, people don't get better. They get processed, warehoused, and traumatized.
Yeah.
What do you think that we can do to actually fix this problem?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, to grab a phrase. I think that this is the type of problem that if money was thrown at it and thrown in the right direction, we could potentially, I wouldn't say solve it, because I don't think there's a solving it. I think we can help a lot of people. So what does that involve? It involves making quality and clinically appropriate treatment available to everybody. Now, as a general rule, the folks that I'm working with either have health insurance, it could be private health insurance, it could be some type of governmental insurance, or they have the financial resources to pay for quality treatment. Even where I reside in Palm Beach County, we do have a county facility, and they do good work. The problem is there's such a heavy demand on them, and there is such limited resources that there's not always a bed available. So that can be a problem. Now, I know that there's been some talk. I think I've I even talked about this online. The Federal Health and Human Services Secretary Robert Kennedy has said we're going to throw a boatload of money at this. That sounds good, and I don't want to get political, but we've seen in certain states like Minnesota and California that when the government throws money at a situation without monitoring it and making sure it's going to the people that really need it, that's when you get folks that like to take advantage of this, and the money gets stolen. Okay, and it's not a Republican or a Democrat thing. It's just that there's always, even during COVID, we had people, making claims for their business and going out and buying Lamborghinis. That's the nature of the beast. So it sounds good. In theory, the question is, can the federal government administer the money and make sure it gets to the people that desperately need it? Because quality treatment is not available to everybody. And I think that in this country, I'm an immigrant, for lack of a better. I came here 40 years ago from the United Kingdom. I think that's simply not acceptable. We also do a really crappy job of taking care of our veterans. My father-in-law is a veteran. We don't take care of those folks. I can't tell you how many calls I get from people that end up getting sucked into the mental health system through the VA, because the VA didn't do a good job taking care of them when they first came in. So we got to make quality treatment available to everybody. And sounds like the federal government is recognizing that and wants to put some money at it. It just depends whose hands it's going to go in. If it goes in the right hands, I think we can make a big dent. If it doesn't, we're going to see more money getting stolen and people buying Lamborghinis that shouldn't be buying Lamborghinis with government money.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. And, as a veteran, I spent some time in the
Thank you for
U.S.
your
Marines,
service.
and thank you for that. I spent some time in the Marines, and when I came out and I was going through some of the basic stuff, I wasn't even seeking anything, or I wasn't having trouble at the time. But boy, they were quick to say, you know what, you're having a little bit of pain here or there. Let's go ahead and push, some of these hardcore narcotics that can become a gateway to psychosis and a bunch of other issues. So
Yep.
yeah, it's a challenging situation. Um, you know, Going back to when you became a prosecutor, was there a defining moment that made you jump from being a prosecutor to what you do today?
It's been a hell of a journey for me. I'm going to be 60 in January, and I will tell you, I did really not get my act together, both personally and professionally, until I was about 48 or 49 years of age. So I left the state attorney's office in 99. I went and did private defense work. I made a lot more money, and I was completely miserable. I totally lost my passion for practicing law. I was unhappy. I got married at 34. I got divorced at 35. I had a year-long marriage. It was a total disaster. And it made me ask myself a very important question, which was I happy? And it was very easy to answer that. The answer was no. And I tried lots of different things other than practicing law. One, I had to put food on the table, and two, I had to find somewhere I could really get passionate about what I was doing. And I had other vices. People ask me, well, what was your drug of choice? Fast cars and fast women. Sometimes not in that order, but that was my vice. So I tried not to practice law. I ended up in 2012. I literally ran off to California for 3 years. I took what money I had left. I went to California for 3 years. I took the bar exam out there twice and failed it twice. When I wasn't studying for the bar, I was doing the things that, a typical bachelor might do in Southern California. But after 3 years, when I was broke and had no money, I had to come home. So I came back to South Florida. I decided I was going to take one more shot at the California bar. So I sat down at the local library here in Boca. And I studied for the bar exam for a third time, flew back, took it, found out I'd gotten within a percentage point, but still failed it, and said, okay, maybe I'm just not supposed to be there. And then what happened was I met somebody that completely changed the direction of my life. So one morning I got invited to go and I got invited to a breakfast presentation where there was a guy there, his name is R. John Robbins, who was going to talk about the one thing they do not teach any law student at any law school anywhere in the country, and that is the business side of being a lawyer, how to be an entrepreneurial lawyer. Now, I come from somewhat humble beginnings. My dad left school at 14 and my mother left school at 16. I was the first person even to finish high school. So going to law school and passing the bar was a very big deal in my family. It had never happened before. But my dad was an entrepreneur and he built businesses. Some worked, some didn't. Some made money, and towards the end of his life, it decimated him financially and also in many other ways. So this guy talked about the entrepreneur side of being a lawyer, and there was about 20 other lawyers in the room. They were all, looking at him like he had three heads because they knew nothing about business because they don't teach us that stuff in law school. But it really resonated with me, and I heard him speak for about an hour, and afterwards I begged him for a job. I think he interviewed me two times and ended up hiring me. So I spent a year there working for him and his company, and I learned about the business side of practicing law. But here's what I didn't know when I went to work for him. That at their very core, this company is a personal growth company for lawyers. And I realized two very important things. Number one, the reason I had been miserable and broke, both personally and professionally, is I had failed to take 100% responsibility for my very poor decisions, both in my personal life and in my business life. So I was broke. And the other thing that I learned was that if I was going to open up a law firm, because by that time I was like, okay, I got the skill set now, I can build a law firm. I had to find a group of people that I could help. I had to get that feeling good about what I was doing, and I had to get passionate about practicing law, and by doing that, helping people. And I had a lot of close family members and friends who had these issues. So here's what I did. That library I told you I studied for the bar exam for the third time, that's where I opened up my law firm. In February of 16, I sat down in that library and I opened up my law firm. I sat down in the cafeteria there where they sold pretty decent, cheap coffee. I had the cheapest business cards that Vistaprint could possibly make. I ran around to treatment centers, handed out my business card. I created a spreadsheet. I called it smiling and dialing. I called as many people as I could. You got to remember, I hadn't lived in the state in 3 years. I hadn't practiced law in probably over 5. And I just said, I'm here. This is what I'm doing. And it took 14 months before anybody called me with a behavioral health case. So in the meantime, my very first case was a student athlete here in Central Florida who got himself in hot water with a female student. In fact, him and another student athlete both got themselves in hot water with the same female student. So you can use your imagination on that one. So I took that case. I took criminal cases. I took family law cases, which I co-counseled with a friend of mine from law school because I didn't know much about family law. I took whatever I could to pay bills. 11 months in, my father unexpectedly passed away. So I was a mad scramble to find as many credit cards as I could so I could pay for his funeral. So whatever could possibly go wrong was going wrong. But in the meantime, I'm like, I'm going to do this. And by the time I got to 2017, I had enough to get a small office, which we still have in an executive suite. I met my now wife there. So my wife, who became my wife 2.5 years ago. So that part of my life took a little bit longer to take responsibility for. It turns out to be the single best decision I've ever made. She had a background in guardianship work. So she lived in Massachusetts with husband number one when she had her children. After they got divorced, she came back to Florida. But what we figured out is that you could use guardianship, which is traditionally for elderly people. And even today, I get people telling me, oh, you can only use this for elderly people. My wife is a genius with this stuff. And she literally, figuratively speaking, wrote the book on how to use guardianship for behavioral health issues. And we started to work together. And for the next 6 years, we worked 8 days a week, 25 hours a day. Sales, marketing, meeting with clients, drafting pleadings, running to court. You name it, we did it. It's only been the last 2.5, 3 years where we've hired staff. Now we're a team of 15. But it has been an exercise in passion, in grit, in determination of success and failure and, revamping and all the other things that go along with building a business. Because at the end of the day, it's just a business. I happen to sell legal services, but if you're a restaurant, you sell food, but it's the same principle. So it's been an interesting ride for me, but that is my story. And like I said, it took me a long time for me to get my act together. So, people look at me and say, oh, well, you're successful. Yeah, but I'm going to be 60 in January and it's only just recently happened.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to get here.
Well, good for you. Good for you and your wife. And, we do a lot of, research as we get ready to do these conversations. And you're doing, you and your wife, your entire practice is doing great work. So even though it took a little longer, I think it was your mission and purpose. I actually want to jump, though, and talk about sort of the legal framework, translate that a little bit. Again, we're going to have families, friends, communities that are listening to this that has somebody in addiction. They may have some mental health issues. This all relates to missing persons, of course, as well. What I want to talk about, though, is the myth of waiting until they're ready, right? That's something that you often hear people talk about, waiting until they're ready. Why is this framing, often medically and legally backwards?
Yeah. So first of all, I think that one of the changes in the way we look at folks with behavioral health issues is the idea that it's not necessarily a conscious decision. It's a disease. It's a disease of the mind, and like any disease, it's progressive and it will eventually destroy this person for the most part. That's number one. Number two, when you look at it as a disease, then you say, okay, well then the cure, if there is a cure, is to get somebody into treatment. So sometimes when I speak to families, and I've at this point spoken to thousands of families over the years, they'll say, well, I'm waiting for him or her to hit rock bottom. Well, my response is, I'm not waiting for them to hit rock bottom. I'm waiting for you to hit rock bottom. First of all, their rock bottom might be they're dead. And I hate to be blunt about this, but for any folks that have seen some of my content online, you'll know that I always come from a place of love. I don't judge anybody, but I'm always going to be honest with you because we're talking about trying to save your loved one and their family. And anybody who's not honest with you should be somebody that's just avoided. So I'm always going to be honest, even though I come from a place of love. And somebody's rock bottom might mean either they're dead, they're in prison, or they're in a state mental hospital. Those are not good outcomes for you. So it's not about whether or not they are at rock bottom, because they're never going to be at a point, for the most part, where they can make the decision to save themselves. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in denial. They wouldn't be getting arrested or in a mental hospital or overdosing or not taking their medications or, unable to hold down a job or flunking out of school, or hanging out with all kinds of people they would never hang out with, or aloof. I mean, all of the things that go along when you're dealing with somebody with a behavioral health issue. So we cannot expect them to make the decision to save themselves. So the question I ask families is, when have you had enough? When have you suffered enough? When are you sick and tired of being sick and tired? Because when you are, then you will have hit rock bottom and you're like, okay, we're ready to do something about this. And that's the point families have to get to. You know, one of my mentors, the mentor I told you I worked for, I mean, his response to me when I would, we would talk to lawyers from all over the country who, for whatever reason, just couldn't get their business moving in the right direction, but yet couldn't make the decision to at least come and look at what we were doing. He'd say, well, then maybe they didn't suffer enough. And I always thought that was a little harsh. But the truth of the matter is that when a family has suffered enough because they've watched their loved one go through this chaos, then they're ready to have a conversation and talk about what it takes for them, as opposed to their loved one or the state, to make the decision to save this person. And sometimes families don't get there, ever. And that is a very difficult conversation to have with a family, because we tend to find out that the person either died, ended up in prison, or ended up in a state hospital. That's it. So that's what we're talking about. It's up to the family. When have you had enough? I can't answer that question for you. I'm not here to tell you that you've reached rock bottom. I'm here to give you some options. And then you tell me, yeah, we're done. We're ready to go. Let's choose a different path for our family. Great. Let's talk about what that looks like.
Yeah. First of all, that's great information. So, let's talk about if we have a family where they're experiencing this and they're ready to take that next step. I think that there's a lot of families that may be in that situation where they don't quite understand the options that are available to them. Things like the Baker Act, which is involuntary psychiatric holds. I believe this is pronounced the Marchman Act,
Yes.
which is an involuntary substance treatment. I know you mentioned emergency guardianship. Could you sort of just speak to those?
Yeah, so those are the three statutes we operate under. I would also tell you that you can't exclude the criminal arena in the conversation. I don't take criminal cases anymore. I refer them out to a colleague that I trust to handle these cases. But folks can and do get arrested. And what people need to understand is that the criminal world, if you understand how the criminal world intersects with my world, then you know how to, the idea is we can get them out of the criminal system. So if you are, somebody who only does Marchman Acts, that's great. I'm sure you're great at what you do. But what happens if we need a guardianship? What happens if they get arrested? What happens if they get sucked into the mental health system through the Baker Act? You have to understand how all of this works together. So from a civil perspective, because I'm operating in the civil world, I'm not operating in the criminal world as a general rule, the three statutes that we operate under are the Marchman Act, guardianship, and the Baker Act. Let me talk about Baker Act first, because every state has a version of the Baker Act. We just call it Baker Act because it's named after somebody whose last name was Baker, as is the Marchman Act, named after somebody whose last name was Marchman. The Baker Act is our state statute that allows the state to take temporary custody, at least initially, of somebody who's suffering from some type of mental health issue and requires immediate assessment and stabilization. They're suicidal. They've had a psychotic break, right? We want to be able to pick up the phone and call 911 and say, we need emergency help right now. And when that happens, typically what will happen is the police will get called. Now, the police in Florida and in Massachusetts and most states are agents not just of the state's criminal justice system, they can arrest you, they're also agents of the state's mental health system. They can pull you into the mental health system. They can Baker Act you, right? But instead of taking you to county jail, they're going to take you to some type of state mental receiving facility that's in that particular county. So the Baker Act is our statute that allows the state to grab us. Now, when it's done correctly, it's a wonderful, powerful, life-saving tool, because if it's somebody's truly having a break or they're actively suicidal, you don't have time to call me and let me draft a petition and run to court and get a judge to review it. We need help right now, which is why being able to call 911 is really important. But especially during COVID and ever since then, people have been getting sucked into Florida's mental health system through the Baker Act process, and it has some serious issues. The first of which is that once you get Baker Acted, nobody actually knows you're there, meaning there's no oversight, right? That's number one, and I'll explain the difference between that and why you'd actually better off to go to the county jail than you are to go to get Baker Acted. Number two, because these facilities that are receiving these patients, even though they are private for profit, they are licensed agents of the state's mental health system. And that means, as a general rule, they enjoy sovereign immunity. You can't sue them for this stuff, even if they get it wrong. Now, obviously, if you're harmed, and I had a woman that was sexually assaulted, I had another kid that was beaten up, that's different because they do have a duty to keep you safe. But as a general rule, if they violate your statutory and constitutional rights, you can't sue them for this stuff. So there's no sort of sanction if they do it wrong. In fact, if you've got health insurance or there's somebody footing the bill for you, they're very much encouraged to try and keep you, even in violation of your rights. So there's a problem with the Baker Act. But when it's done right, it's important. And it's not unusual for us to have somebody court-ordered into treatment. They have a psychotic break. And now we need that. The facility is going to Baker Act them and have them transported to a higher level of care where it's going to be a secure environment. Great. We know where they are. We can get them back out. We get them into treatment. So again, when it's done right, it's great. So that's the Baker Act. The Marchman Act is very similar to the Baker Act in the way it can be initiated, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to be initiated by a private cause of action. Right? We might represent the parents, and they're filing against adult child, and it is for primary substance use disorders, and also contemplates co-occurring. So Baker Act think Baker Act for mental health issues, think Marchman Act for substance use issues. And with the Marchman Act, there's 2 parts to it. And if I confuse you, let me know. But there's assessment, like the Baker Act, and there is treatment. Now, the Baker Act is not a treatment statute. It's really for stabilization. But the Marchman Act has a treatment component that allows us to send people into treatment for periods of up to 90 days, which can get repeated. But that assessment period can get initiated on an emergency basis, meaning I file a petition with the court. The court reviews the petition, does not conduct a hearing, does not appoint a lawyer, and says, yep, you need a court order right now. This person's, potentially may self-harm, right, because of their substance use. And I can get a court order to normally get law enforcement to go out there and grab the person and get them to a receiving facility that we get to designate most of the time. And again, it's county specific. So, and then within 10 days, we're going to have a hearing and send them to treatment. So Marchman substance use, Baker Act, think of as a emergency stabilization statute. The guardianship is a statute, again, like that we really sort of use not for the purpose it was intended to. What do I love about guardianship? It gives us phenomenal control. So the Marchman Act is great. It can be initiated very quickly, and it would send me to treatment for 90 days, but it's a very narrow form of relief. In other words, it says, Mark, you're going to treatment for 90 days. My parents called the facility, and I'm mad at them now because, well, you sent me to treatment, and there's nothing wrong with me. So now I'm mad at you. And my parents call the facility, and they say, well, can we talk to you about what happened to Mark? Well, he's not signed a release of information for you, so we cannot confirm or deny he's even here. Well, I just wrote you a check for, the first 30 days of treatment. I know. We still can't confirm or deny he's even here. Gotta go. Goodbye. Right? So it does not give the families access to medical records. It doesn't restrict my ability to go jump on a plane and leave the state, or take away my driver's license, or allow you to apply for benefits on my behalf, which might be useful because maybe we can get Uncle Sam to foot some of the bill here. Also, if I've got rent to be paid and a car payment to be made, you can't do that for me because you don't have any authority. With guardianship, maybe we can get that authority. Maybe there's some resources, financial resources, and I'm going to use them to do something. I'm going to waste that money because I'm not thinking clearly. Well, maybe we need to take control of that money just for a period of time, right? So it gives us tremendous control. It's not quite as fast as a Marchman Act, although there is an emergency piece to it, but that can take us 2 to 4 days to get into court. And it may be that we do both together. Maybe I file a Marchman Act because I have drug use, but I also file for guardianship, which gives me phenomenal control. So they get me picked up under the Marchman Act. Meanwhile, we're running into court under the guardianship so they can start getting real control over my life. So, and oh, by the way, in the middle of this craziness, I had a psychotic break and got Baker Acted, right? So there can be times where we are running to 3 different courts, 3 different judges, right? And understanding, again, how all of this works together is so important to be able to really not just get control, but maintain control so we can keep the family in the driver's seat, right? Because that's who we want making the decisions. The people that know me best, the people that love me the most, not the state. We don't want them in my life. We don't want them in the family's life. But that can happen, and it does happen when we wait for the person to hit rock bottom.
Wow. A lot of information there. And
A lot.
I don't think,
and I'm happy to clarify.
Yeah.
It's taken
I
me 10
appreciate
years
that.
to gather all that information.
Yeah. Yeah. We're just doing a crash course here, but so I don't think, I would probably say that 7 out of 10 families probably don't even realize that a lot of this exists. And maybe you can quantify and keep us straight on that. But kind of going back to a couple things here. So the Marchman Act, is that just for specific states, or is that pretty much offered nationwide?
Only in Florida. There's nothing else quite like it, which is one of the reasons we bring a lot of people into Florida. I mean, most of my clients, mums and dads, are not in Florida. They're as far west as Hawaii, as far north as that New York, New Jersey, whole New England corridor. So folks are coming here for treatment. One, we have good treatment here. And two, we have these laws here that enables us to get control of somebody. And I only need their feet in Florida. I don't care if they're a citizen. It doesn't matter to me if they're a resident. It doesn't matter. If they're in Florida, the court can have jurisdiction over them. And that's powerful.
That is powerful. How, there's two things that come to mind. One, I think a lot of families may have the thought, if I take this option, this is the nuclear button. I'm going to implode my relationship with my son, my daughter, whoever we're talking about here. What advice would you give to a family member that's thinking like that?
Yeah, and I think that's a real concern. But here's what I would say. I know that this looks like your loved one, sounds like them, walks like them. It's the proverbial duck. But they are not running the show right now. At some point, somewhere in the past, their mind was hijacked, okay, or kidnapped, as I've heard it used, right? It's not them. So their disease is running the show, whatever that disease might be. And that's who's making the decisions, which is why they either won't go to treatment, won't take their meds, or if they go to treatment, they're in and out, because as soon as the hard work starts, they got to leave, right? So their disease is going to fight like hell. So if they're angry, it's not really them, but it can take 3 to 6 months for that light bulb to really come on. Hold on a second, I'm back, right? And I've seen it happen, but it takes time. Recovery's a journey, it's not a destination. And I tell every family that, think of me as the ghost of Christmas future. This is a 1-year program. You don't necessarily need me for the whole year. I might be there just sort of in the background, not actively working on your case unless I'm needed. But this is a year-long journey. You're not fixing 5, 10 or more years of behavioral health issues in 30 days, right? And anybody who tells you otherwise is just BSing you, to be perfectly honest with you, and happy to take your money. That's not me. I'm here to get it right the first time so that you can end the chaos and the nightmare you've been dealing with. But I don't have a magic wand. And if I did and I waved it, it would take a year for you to probably see the results. Because we want them in recovery, and we want them to be able to maintain recovery on their own for the rest of their life. And we just know from experience, it takes a year. And the statistics bear out the fact that if you can keep somebody in recovery for a year, there's a 70% chance they maintain recovery forever. If they get them to 5 years, it's 83%. So the big jump is in that first year. That first year is the key to everything, especially the first 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, that's powerful. So in a situation where, let's say that a mom has a 24-year-old daughter, right? I'm going to reference the first missing person case we ever worked. It involved human and sex trafficking and drugs. Let's say we have a situation where this is happening in Florida. The 24-year-old daughter, is at a motel. That's where she's staying at. She's being trafficked. These traffickers have been able to basically lure drugs, which happens all the time, in her face and say, hey, we're going to give you these drugs for free. We're going to feed your addiction, but we now own you. You now work for us. We're going to pimp you out. Can that family still take the Marchman Act or emergency guardianship process in a case like that, even if they're living somewhere completely different?
Well, they need to be in Florida. So I think there's 2 issues here. One is there a law enforcement issue, cause of action on those? Can we get the police to go in there and maybe grab her? And or number two, can we use the system here, the civil judicial system, to get them into treatment? And I think both of those could, in theory, work. But I need them here in Florida. Now, let's say they're here in Florida. I mean, listen, back in 7-8 years ago, we had a problem like that here in Florida, where we had certain individuals who are now, very long-term guests of the state of Florida, who were literally doing that, right? Especially with women. They were prostituting them, feeding them drugs, right? And they get them into recovery, and then they feed them the drugs, they relapse, and they were it was horrible. Okay, so we've seen that. Those folks ended up getting arrested. But what happened to the patients, right? Well, some of those folks needed help to get into treatment. So I think you can do both. Now, one of the things I have on staff, and I modeled this a little bit after when I was a prosecutor, and we had our own internal police forces. I've got a private investigator on staff. I mean, John is a retired federal cop. He was a DA agent, and he's got a team of investigators. So we get calls for people that are missing. Sometimes we can find them, sometimes we can't. Sometimes people walk out of treatment and we can find them. So while I'm a fan of, men and women who wear the uniform, sometimes they're overwhelmed and they don't have the resources to go looking for somebody. Well, if we have the resources that I can tell the family, hire my guy, there's a good chance he could find them. And if we can find them, then we can grab them. And so there are times where we will file something and I may not have an exact location. Now, it used to be with the clerk's office, when I filed the case, they say, Mr. Asher, I need a specific address. Well, Madam Clerk, they're in the county somewhere. Now, I have a good idea where they are because I have to have a general idea where to go looking for them. These days, they will accept that filing because they know I'll go find them. And John is pretty good at finding people. I have to have a starting point. But if I can get a judge to give me an order, I'm going to send my guy out there to go find this person. And once he does, he's going to call the local law enforcement and say, I need 2 deputies down there. Like right now, I have a court order in hand. I got to get this person, send them down. And a lot of time we can do that. But sometimes it's looking for a needle in a haystack. And I can't tell, for the families that are looking here, that I could wave the proverbial magic wand. I can certainly help you, and John is awesome at this stuff. But that is, this whole human trafficking thing is a very, that is a real problem. Okay, I know it's a problem. And there are just individuals out there who will take advantage of people. It's just disgusting. But we do see it. I'm sad for the families that have to endure this.
You and I both. Final question. When we think about, let's just go back to a simple example here. We have a 24-year-old living with mom and dad at home. They're using drugs, heroin. It's getting to a point where they are seriously concerned for the person's life. Is there when you go through the process and you think about establishing the baseline, what I'm going to loosely call probable cause, so you can get the Marchman Act or guardianship, whatever it is there a certain quantity, or is it just in general? Does it go back to, hey, you got to kind of define how much this particular person is using the drugs, or how does that work?
So we're not looking at a criminal statute. Obviously, in a criminal statute, right? There's a difference between having a little blunt versus a bag full of marijuana, right? Because in most criminal jurisdictions, they consider that trafficking. So it's not so much quantity. It's a couple of things. One is, how long has this been going on for? What's been tried and potentially failed? Is the person in denial? And as a result, is there a likelihood they will self-harm? And what I mean by that is their life falling apart? Do we look at them in an objectively rational way and say, this person's life is falling apart, right? Can't hold down a job, flunks out of school, sleeps all day, up all night, hanging out with loser friends, doesn't take meds. There's evidence of drug use, found within the house. They're admitting it. Those types of things. I mean, that's a sort of 10,000 foot overview of the criteria for a Marchman Act. But those types of things. Obviously, if somebody's actively using in the house, we almost certainly have sufficient evidence, right? And by the time they get to me, normally this has been going on for a long time, several years.
No, that's good to know. So no doubt we have families that are listening to this that may want to reach out, connect with you, learn more. Where can we direct them?
Yep. So if you go to The Mental Health Addiction Law Firm.com website. That's mentalhealthaddictionlawfirm.com. That's our main website. And on there actually is, just wrote a book about the Marchman Act, and you can download it for free. You go to resources, look under ebooks, there's 2 of them. The newest one is the Marchman Act book. You click on it, you give us your name, your email, we'll send you the book for free. So there's a lot on there. Or just Google my name. I have 1,200 videos on YouTube. I put out 2, sometimes 3 videos every day talking exactly about these issues, the kinds of questions that families ask me, and I make video content. And actually, if you find a video online, and I always tell families, if there's something I haven't made a video about, let me know, post in the comments, I'll make you that video. So I'm on YouTube, I'm on all the other social media platforms, I'm pretty easy to find. And can I give out the phone number too?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so the main number to the office is 561-419-6095. And if you call, tell me you're a potential new client. I have 4 amazing people in our intake department. They're not lawyers, but they can offer you all the options that potentially might be available, and they have access to all the resources. They're just phenomenal. So if you want to have a conversation, we'd love to talk to you.